Deus, member of Knesset, Dr. Yuval Steinitz, who joined us earlier. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Ambassador Danny Gillerman. Ambassador Dan Gillerman has served as Israel's ambassador to the United Nations since January 1st, 2003. On Ambassador Gillerman's watch, the Israeli mission has had some very impressive achievements, culminating in November 2005 when Ambassador Gillerman became the first Israeli representative to successfully introduce a resolution to the United Nations General Assembly. In a unanimous decision, the General Assembly designated January 27th as an annual International Holocaust Remembrance Day. In June 2005, Ambassador Gillerman was elected to serve as the Vice President of the General Assembly of the United Nations. He is the first Israeli representative to serve as Vice President of the General Assembly in 53 years, since Abba Eban served in that position in 1952. During his tenure, Ambassador Gillerman has worked closely with members of the European Union and is in constant negotiation with the Secretary General and other delegations in order to help improve Israel's standing in the international community and acceptance as a full member in the UN. He is the recipient of numerous honors and awards, including honorary doctorates from the Netanya Academic College and Bar-Ilan University, the International Friendship Award from the Federal Law Enforcement Foundation, and the Golden Eagle Diplomat Wings of Law Award for the Respect for Law and Alliance. His son, David, is a graduate of IDC Herzliya, School of Business and School of Law, which is the most important part of his CV, actually. And one last part of his CV, which isn't mentioned here, is that Israel does not have a very good soccer team. Our basketball team is a little better. We have had some good statesmen in the past who served us in the UN, such as Abba Eban, such as Chaim Herzog, and I think we're very proud as Israeli citizens to have a person like Danny Gillerman in the United Nations who speaks eloquently, who speaks with a touch of class. And if Professor Kotler was speaking about public diplomacy in the past, perhaps the Foreign Ministry of Israel will learn the lesson that the more Danny Gillermans there are around the world, the more and the better we can make the case for Israel.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan, for this very gracious introduction, and especially for putting me on the same level as Professor Kotler. He mentioned his son, you mentioned my son. Now we are even. I also have a daughter and 4 gorgeous grandchildren. Let me start with a confession, an apology, and a warning. Confession is how I actually got to be here. I came to Israel on holiday. I brought this jacket with no intention of ever wearing it. And one day I got a call from someone I admire very much, Professor Uriel Reichman, who said to me, "Danny, you've now been in the United States for nearly 5 years." I said, "Yes, that's true." "You obviously by now know the American Constitution." I said, "Yes, of course I do." He said, "Then you believe in free speech." I said, "Of course I do." He said, "Good, because you're about to give one." The apology is for my very hoarse voice, which I could explain as the occupational hazard of representing Israel in that glass building on First Avenue, but it may be also a result of spending a lot of time with my grandchildren. It's actually not the first time that I stand at the podium and I feel compelled to apologize for some impediment. Not long ago I was shaving in the morning, thinking about an important speech I was going to deliver that night. And while I was shaving, I cut myself very, very badly on my cheek. That evening, that cut was still very prominent. I felt the need to explain it. And when I did, and I told the audience that in the morning I was really, thinking about my speech, and I cut my face, a very nice gentleman came to me at the end of my speech and said, "Ambassador Gillerman, I have some advice for you. Next time you shave, think about your face and cut your speech." So this actually brings me to the warning. The warning is that I'm going to try and break a few rules this morning. I'm already breaking a rule by being here because, as you know, one of the famous Hollywood rules is never participate in a movie where there is either a dog or a kid. one of the conference rules that should be made and enacted as law is never follow Professor Irving Kotler. Now, I'm breaking that rule now, Professor, and taking a very big chance. But I'm also going to try and break another rule. By definition, a conference about terrorism is one about doom and gloom. And I, maybe because of the first rain of the season, am going to try, as difficult as it may sound, to inject some ray of light, some ray of hope into this very dark reality we all live in. And I'll try and leave you with a certain degree of optimism in this very, very tough neighborhood and this very dangerous world we live in. A, because I believe that the only way you can survive either in Israel or in the Middle East, or indeed at the United Nations, is by being an incurable optimist. But also because I believe we have some reason for optimism, precisely because of the very real danger the world is facing, and which has been described so eloquently and so professionally both by Dr. Boaz Ganor and Professor Kotler. I believe that we today have a unique opportunity because of the dangers, because of the threat, because of this incredibly, dramatically changing world we live in, to fight terrorism with coalitions, with forces, and with means which were not at our disposal before. It has been said here, and it is, I think, generally agreed, that the world has changed profoundly. 5 years, 11 months, and 29 days ago, actually the day after tomorrow, we will be marking the 6th anniversary of that devastating attack on the Twin Towers in New York, on the Pentagon in Washington. And the world did stand still for a moment and then wake up to a new reality, which I believe was indeed a line in the sand, which I believe was indeed a watershed moment. But it has not changed enough. And I can illustrate this, or try to illustrate it, by taking you back to May of last year, May of 2006, when I addressed the AIPAC National Policy Conference in Washington, D.C. There were 4,500 people in the room. And it was a time when everybody was telling me, was telling us, was telling everybody, you know, maybe things aren't that bad. You know, Hezbollah is now part of the Lebanese government. They are a democratic movement. They want to do good. They want to legitimize themselves. Talk to them. Hamas have just won the general elections democratically, and the Palestinian Authority. They too want to be part of the democratic scene. They want to be perceived as a political party. Give them a chance. They're really nice people. They're not, don't take them too seriously. Talk to them. Iran is a country which is on the verge of a grassroots revolution. 50% of its population is under the age of 18. 60% of its university students are women. There are liberal forces. You know, don't pay any attention to Ahmadinejad. Talk to the Iranian people. Engage them. Talk to them. What I said to those 4,500 people, which you could, I thought until today, was a word you could only use at AIPAC, because that's really your home ground, but I just heard Dr. Boaz Ganor use it at the beginning of his presentation, but I will not dare repeat it in front of this very auspicious audience. I can only tell you two things. When I said it, I got a standing ovation from 4,500 people. You don't need to do it now. And the second thing is that the next day, the Washington Post, that devoted half a page to my speech, said that the undiplomatic Israeli ambassador used a barnyard expression involving a bull. That's the way the Washington Post described it. This is what I said. Because if you remember the mood then, there was that mood. Hamas is democratic, Hezbollah are really nice guys, the Iranians don't really mean it. That was May of 2006. Remember what happened 2 months later, July 2006. Another reminder, another wake-up call to the world of how nice and engaging and democratic and unharmful these nice guys who gave the world suicide bombing and hostage-taking and terrorism really are. And I truly believe that that confrontation, which started on our northern border with the evil and brutal kidnapping of Eldad Regev and Udi Goldwasser, following 2 weeks earlier the kidnapping of Gilad Shalit by Hamas, and the war that ensued, was indeed a wake-up call to the world. Because the world, as was mentioned here, realized that this was really not a war or a battle or a confrontation between Israel and a terror organization. The world realized that this was the first all-out war between a democratic, secular government and a radical fundamentalist regime, Islamic regime, namely, truly, a war between Israel and Iran. That is what it was. Because the Hezbollah is nothing more than part of the Revolutionary Guard, a unit in the Iranian army, and a proxy and the hired killer of Iran. It is the bloody tentacles and the manifestation of the evil minds of Tehran. And that is what we were fighting, together with a very great help and assistance given to them by their masters and sponsors in Damascus. And all of a sudden, the words I was hearing were changing. I cannot begin to tell you how many ambassadors, foreign ministers, and leaders of countries who not only do not recognize us, but are hostile to us, came to me either at Security Council meetings or in the corridors of the UN, put their arms around me and said, "Go girl, finish the job. Finish the job. Don't stop." When I was sitting at the Security Council on the 3rd or 4th day of the war, facing the foreign minister of Lebanon, and I said to him, looking him straight in the eye, I said to him, "You know, deep down in your heart, that if you could, you would be sitting right here next to me, saying exactly what I'm saying, because you know that if we win, Lebanon ultimately will be the true winner." I looked at him. He did not acknowledge it. He did not nod. But he bowed his head, and I knew that that's exactly the way he felt, and I knew that that was exactly the way most of the free world felt. And that, in a way, everybody's talking about the failures and the mistakes and the tragedies of this horrible, brutal, and evil war. And there is committees of inquiries, and there is very many people who are rightly, justly engaged in looking into what went wrong. I believe certain things went right. Not so much in the war itself, but in its aftermath, including the situation in southern Lebanon today, which is dramatically different to what it was before. But I believe the main achievement, if we can call it that, of that battle was indeed that message. It was the realization of the world that this was just a preview. As they say in the United States, soon to be seen in a theater near you, if you're not careful. It was indeed just a preview. And the world realized that this is what is awaiting them unless they get together and fight this evil threat, mainly of Iran and of world international jihad and all the other terror organizations. That realization was not only heard and felt in Washington, D.C., or in London, or in Berlin, or in Paris. It was deeply felt in Riyadh, and in Morocco, and in the Gulf states, and in Cairo, and in Amman, and in the Emirates. I believe it was also felt in Islamabad and in Jakarta, because great parts of the so-called moderate Arab and Muslim world realized, maybe for the first time, where the real danger lay. They realized that Israel was not really a threat to them, that the real threat came from Tehran. They realized that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is really not the main problem, certainly not the core of the problem, certainly not something that will make all other problems go away once it is solved. They realized the main danger and the main threat was the threat of the export of Shia extremism, of Iranian imperialism. Because Iran is an imperialist state. You know, the Secretary General, people keep insisting on calling him the new Secretary General. He's already been in office for nearly 9 months. That's enough time to give birth to a baby. Ban Ki-moon, who is from South Korea, and is, by the way, a very good friend and supporter of Israel, admires us and keeps telling me that the Koreans regard themselves as the Jews of Asia, and does not hide his feelings and does not try to be even-handed and balanced, but stands for what is right. In one of the very intimate talks we had, I said to him, I said, look, you grew up in South Korea. You grew up next to a rogue regime which ultimately acquired nuclear weapons. You must be very worried about this phenomena of Iran. And he said to me, Dan, you know what the difference between Iran and North Korea is? He said, North Korea attained nuclear weapons out of desperation. Iran is seeking them out of aspiration. And that is all the difference in the world. And that realization has sunk in and has made, I believe, many of the countries around us, including some who really don't like us, realize two things. One, that even if they solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, it won't solve the other problems. Because think about it. Just illustrate this for a moment. I mean, there's this Sunni leaving his neighborhood in Baghdad with a sword with which he's going to decapitate the throat of his hated Shia rival. And at the very same time, a Shia leaves another suburb of Baghdad with an electric saw which is going to drive through the brain of that horrible Sunni enemy of his. They're both in their cars. They hear on the radio, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been solved. What do? They say, great. Now we can go home. Everything is okay. Come on, this has got nothing to do with us. You ask Osama bin Laden, he will tell you that this conflict has nothing to do with us. But it may be a nuisance. It may be something which some Arab countries feel that they may want to solve in order to calm their streets and align themselves against the real danger. And the real danger is Iran, and the real danger is the horrible bloodshed and terror that is taking place every single hour, every single second, every single minute, every single day. Where? In the Muslim world. You know, I spoke 2 or 3 months ago at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. In the front row there was Professor Samuel Huntington, who probably 12, 13 years ago wrote that famous book called A Clash of Civilizations. I did not believe that book was right at the time, but I didn't dare say it because because it became the Bible. But when I spoke at Harvard, I said that now I'm convinced that this is not what we are in the midst of. We're not in the midst of a clash of civilizations. We are in the midst of a clash of civilization in the singular. Because when Professor Huntington said the borders of Islam are marked in blood, he was wrong. It's Islam which is covered in blood. Because all the terror, all the bloodshed, all the killings, all the horrors are within Islam. Think about it. Not only do we live in a world in which the vast majority of terrorists are Muslim, but nearly all the victims are Muslim. The vast majority of victims are Muslims. Every single day, hundreds of Muslims are killed by Muslims in Baghdad and in Afghanistan and in Amman and in Sharm el-Sheikh and in Algeria and in Morocco and wherever you look. And to me, the most frightening phenomena is the eerie silence, the sound of silence. Because you would expect, when so many Muslims are killed by Muslims, to see one Muslim leader, one religious, political, get up and say, enough is enough. What are we doing? We are killing each other. Let's put an end to it. You don't hear one. You know, it's as if we live in a world in which when Christians kill Muslims, it's a crusade. When Jews kill Muslims, it's a massacre. When Muslims kill Muslims, it's the Weather Channel. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. And I believe today that they are starting to care. And I believe that what we're seeing around us is a result of that. Whether we like Saudi Arabia or not, whether we believe it means well, whether we're able to put aside the fact that 15 out of the 19 perpetrators of 9/11 came from Saudi Arabia and that it is a terrorist sponsoring state, they're behaving differently. When you look at the conference of the Arab League of the 22 states who met in Iraq, in Riyadh, this was not about Israel. This was about Iran. This was again a manifestation of the fear and the worry and the resolve to try and do something about this nuisance in order to align themselves against the real danger. And that is why I believe that we have a chance. We can build coalitions. Look at the coalition that has been built against Iran. If I would have put it to you a year or two ago, that at the Security Council in December, 15 countries will vote to sanction Iran. And those countries will include not just the United States, Britain and France, but also Russia and China and Qatar, Iran's Muslim and Arab neighbor. You would have thought I was crazy. If I would have told you that in March the Security Council would vote again unanimously, 15 countries, to sanction Iran even further, and that this time there would be not just Qatar, but also South Africa and Indonesia, the largest Muslim country in the world, joining everybody else in condemning and sanctioning Iran, you would have thought I was crazy. And let me tell you something, and I think Professor Kotler alluded to that, Iran is not indifferent to those resolutions. Iran, as opposed to North Korea, does not want to be a pariah. It does not want to belong to that club of lepers. It does not want to be isolated, and they're indeed very worried. So I believe we have a chance. I believe we have a chance in our region to try and solve our conflict in ways in which our neighbors will be willing to be much more pragmatic and much more realistic in order to solve it, meaning mainly that they know that 67 is not an option, because in 67 there was no Palestinian state and there was no contiguity between Gaza and the West Bank, knowing that a two-state solution means that Israel is the solution for the Jewish refugees and Palestine is the solution for the Palestinian refugees. And I believe that this willingness and this fear could lead them to legitimize a deal struck by a Palestinian leader, and hopefully there is or will be one who will have both the guts and the courage and the ability to deliver. And I believe at the same time that we have a chance to form an international coalition, both diplomatic, economic, and if necessary military, against Iran, to make sure that that crazy, lunatic, ranting president who denies the Holocaust while every day preparing the next one cannot achieve his goals. And I believe that at the end of the day, we will prevail. And we will prevail not only because we're good, and not only because we're just, and not only because we're moral, not because we're strong. We will prevail because we live in a changing world. And we will prevail because at the end of the day, a country that has given the world the Israel Philharmonic and the Weizmann Institute and the IDC can do no less. Shana Tova, very happy New Year to all of you.